Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Tom Singer and Craig Brown.
This is the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. This podcast addresses strategies to enable enterprise transformers and decision makers to understand how digital tools and techniques deliver superior results in the global competitive marketplace. My name is Tom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this podcast every single week with Mr. Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran, and he's a former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, here we are again on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Hey, Tom. Good to hear your voice. I'm here in the snow. Well, actually, there is no snow. It's kind of weird, right? Here we are in January and we have no snow. But anyways, I'm looking forward to today's discussion. It should be insightful. We've kind of talked about it in the past, over the past 3 years. And so Mark and I are going to debate it a bit more, okay?
Absolutely, because every couple of weeks, we bring to you the digital battle. And that's where we invite Mark Pendergast to the show so that he and Craig can battle it out on all these things around PLM. Now, Mark is the trustee for content for the Digital Enterprise Society, and he is now going onto the executive board as a vice president to serve this organization. He has over 30 years experience working in and around PLM, and he has a lot of opinions, as does Craig. And so it's always fun for me to kind of be in the middle as the moderator. So today, we're going to talk about lean manufacturing techniques. Is engineering kind of like a factory? Or is it something entirely different? I'm excited to hear what these guys think. Is lean like a factory or is it not? So, Craig, we often start with Mark because he's the visitor here on your and my little show. But today, I'm going to toss it to you for the first question. Why do you think that engineering is resistant to lean techniques?
Well, I don't want to pick on engineering, and I am an engineer, but I think human beings are resistant to lean techniques because it forces them to think about how wasteful they are. You know, we use the word lean, and if we're thinking about a butcher and we think about a cut of meat, lean means get rid of the fat, right? And so lean in this context means the same thing. It means get rid of the waste, the unuseful parts of your engineering process, your engineering factory. And a lot of engineers, think there's nothing wasteful, right? Everything they do is meaningful. And it's more than engineers too, by the way. It could be a manager, it could be a decision maker, it could be just a clerk that moves stuff around. They all think what they do is important. And so lean and importance are kind of in conflict. And so I think that's why people are resistant. You're basically saying, oh, what you do isn't important, or it isn't important anymore. That's hard to take, right? So I think that's why people are resistant.
Mark, what are your thoughts?
Well, I come from a unique perspective because the first half of my career I spent out on the factory floor learning lean techniques and applying them to my factory. And so then I really knew lean before I knew engineering. And as I moved into engineering, I said, why aren't we doing these things? And I'm coming at it from a very different direction than a lot of people in engineering. But I think, not to be mean, but I think there's a certain snobbery in engineering where they are above it all, and they are these bright, special little guys, and they don't want to say, I'm not like one of those hourly guys who's just slamming transmissions down the line or whatever. I'm special, and my stuff is creative, and there's no waste, and everything's wonderful. And I think by accepting the fact that they are a factory, they diminish their status among themselves. And I think that's part of it. And they're not in some dirty factory. They're up at headquarters. They're they're not minions. They're the thought leaders of the enterprise. And I think Craig is right that nobody likes to change. It's, you know what you're doing, and you can do it in your sleep. And why should I do something different? Because it's working just great. I think there's some snobbery involved in it, just saying I'm elite and I'm above it.
But how could you be above it when you're moving data around? That's a menial job, right? And so if they're so good, then how come they got to move data from what the example we were debating a little while ago was 15 different systems, right? It seems to me that's the excellent example of poor, lean, or bad waste.
Well, that's why they need
if they're so good, how come they didn't combine the systems?
They need technicians to move that data around because they're too busy being brilliant.
So that's like transport in a factory. We need more expediters to move material from one part of the factory to another part of the factory because the guy on his throne is too important to actually go get the material himself. One of the lessons in lean from manufacturing, and you know this, is go and see, right?
Yeah.
So don't take the report, walk down on the floor and look for yourself, right? Well, engineering benefits from the same thing. The few chief engineers I really admired, they did exactly that. They walked the floor. What decision are you making today? You engineer, what are you working on, this component or this assembly? And how can I help? I'm not here just to be a policeman. I'm here to aid. I'm the chief. I know how the big thing works, or at least is how it's supposed to work. So how can I help you? So the go and see helps identify waste, right? There's a classic one I had to deal with. It's like, why do we produce this report? It's a validation report, by the way. Oh, we produce a report because the people up in the executive offices don't use their computers the way we do, and they need a paper copy of the validation report. Really? Well, who first asked for that? It was like 2 chairmen of the board ago. And I'm like, here we are a decade later, we're still producing this report. Well, yeah, nobody gave us permission to stop producing the report. That's a form of waste. Lean would identify that and would kick it out. Nobody's using it anymore. But the department that produces it has these eloquent arguments about how they're special, to your point, Mark, and how they have to continue doing what they're doing because they've been doing it forever, right? It's the way we record the knowledge of our company is to do this report. I think I agree with you, but to the people who put themselves on that pedestal, if they're so darn good, then how come they do so much transport? It's called transportation, right? How come there's so much extra movement that they don't have to move, right?
So this sets me up really well for the next question, actually, because I was going to ask you, how is engineering like or dislike a factory?
Well, in a factory, especially a mass production factory, we're building hundreds of thousands of the same thing over and over and over. Well, we don't do that in engineering, right? What we're doing in engineering is we're making, maybe in the same order, a series of decisions about a future product, right? And I think the really good companies, they do it in a certain order because they've learned if they make decisions in the order A, B, and C rather than C, B, and A, they're better. They build a better product. And so you got to have to do the mental leap in your brain about, well, what's the flow of information or the flow of decisions, or gosh forbid, the flow of models, but that's a slippery slope because then you'll create another silo. What's the flow in engineering? And I think it's decisions. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And so now if you apply lean to decision making as opposed to people, then I think it actually gets easier to talk about. So it is like a factory, but you got to identify what's flowing through the factory. What are you producing? In engineering, you're producing decisions.
Mark, what do you think?
I would say that most of engineering is mundane. And I think Craig's got it wrong because he looked at one product program or one product going through the factory. The engineering factory is more like a job shop. They do unique things for any one product, but every day they're gathering requirements, they're doing CAD work, they're doing change orders, they're doing all these things that are the same every day in and day out. And it's boring stuff, and they're very inefficient at it, and there's incredible amounts of waste in the bureaucracy of engineering. And yes, occasionally they have this creative moment where they come up with the next generation whatever, or they save a couple of bucks on this one by doing something different. But at the end of the day, if you watch engineers work day after day after day, they do the same thing over and over and over again. Process change requests, go to change review meetings, go chase parts, go source parts. each one of those activities, even though it might be unique for a product, is the same activity day in and day out. They are very open to waste and the elimination of waste through standardized work and setup time reduction and all the things that we've learned out on the factory. So I think engineering is a paper factory, and they make paper, or electronic paper. And that process is very inefficient, but very repetitive. They do the same things all over. So why not focus in on those and say, why does it take us forever to get ready for design review? That's setup time reduction. Why are we moving this stuff all over the place? That's getting your operations in line. Why? Why? The 5 whys, my favorite topic, all applies. It's very much like a factory. Now, it's not like a factory in that it's more of a job shop where individual things are tailored, but it's still like a factory because a job shop's a factory.
Mark, it sounds like the factory in 1910, where everything was a job shop. The specialist came over with his sledgehammer to pound the fender into position and then rivet it there, right? I mean, the point I'm trying to make is, and that too evolved, right? And it evolved when people found the wasteful movement, the wasteful overproduction, the scrap. I mean, looking at a factory scrap is interesting. So looking at change reviews and rejections of change reviews would be really interesting. It would improve the efficiency of a engineering operation. Why are we having so many change reviews? But one of the most interesting things I learned over the years, change is good, right? Because you're making it better. But change after release is bad because that means you missed something earlier. And so part of the problem is your metrics. What are you measuring? And I think if you measure the wrong thing, like release on time being an example of one, and then you saw people were writing a change order right after they released on time so that they could fix it. So measure the right thing and be careful of the telltale signs, right? If you're doing more and more change orders faster and faster, you might be asking yourself, well, why are there so many changes? Why can't we make better decisions in the first place, right? So I don't know. I think it's about decisions, but I heard you. I understand your position. Maybe we need another question, Tom.
No, I'm ready for you because this actually transitioned well. So are there any lean techniques that are just totally incompatible with engineering?
At least from my standpoint, no. I grew up on the factory floor. I had this stuff beat into my head. And when I showed up in engineering, I was appalled at the inefficiency and the waste that I saw. And I spent most of my career and got some accolades for trying to apply some of these techniques and try and move the cats, herd the cats along to try and eliminate some waste. And it just always astounded me that these people didn't think of what they were doing like a factory, like a paper pusher factory or electronic paper pusher factory, and that there were repetitive items that you could optimize. And no, I have been a big advocate. I have pounded on the table. I've tried to get people to listen, beg, cajole, threaten, whatever I had to do to get these lean techniques implemented. But it just seems like it's so completely out of their paradigm, they can't even find the handle. So, no, I think it's all good. I think it would really benefit engineering, and I don't see any downside at all.
Craig, what do you think?
Well, I agree. I don't see a downside. And so I'm not a guy that has that kind of manufacturing background, though I audited plants now and then for the kind of parts I was engineering. But I will tell you, my eyes opened up. I'd read all the books about the Toyota production system and all the rest, and went to all the training I was required to go to because I was a manager, right? But what really got my eyes is walking a floor and seeing andon boards across the whole factory floor. And within seconds, I could tell where the constraint in the factory was. And it wasn't unique to me. It was visible to everybody. So you're making it visible to everybody on the floor where the current problem is. And then the culture of the place is to go help those people, not to criticize them. Is to go figure out, well, why are they currently the constraint? And so the idea of constraints management, applying lean techniques. I think the reason engineering struggles is engineering doesn't actually know their process. They know there's a review coming up, and they know there's a bunch of work to get ready for the review with the chief, but maybe they haven't documented, well, how do you get ready for the chief so that it's not a chaotic event in time? And that's where process comes in. And if we can model a process of a factory or a process of any kind of business system, you can certainly model engineering processes. Once you model engineering processes and you start to measure them, the waste becomes apparent. And it's easier for people to embrace it. They're like, well, I don't know why I do the design review that way. I always have. I haven't learned a better way. And so I think make the process visible, the engineering process, and then ask yourself the question, am I competitive? Are other people faster? The process will tell you time to market. It'll tell you your constraint, your critical path in your business, and it'll tell you how long it takes to get your idea to market. And then you have to decide with that insight whether it's competitive. When it's not competitive, then you go after the constraints. And the theory of constraints, we've talked about it here before. There's usually one or two constraints. You fix them and one or two others show up, right? But you don't fix everything at once. And maybe that's another corollary to this debate. Lean is about knowing where to focus your energy to make things better. And then once you improve that, you can go on to the next challenge, right? Not trying to make like peanut butter spread across way too many initiatives. It's not like trying to get everybody better at once. It's to get everybody focused on the constraint.
Well,
and so lean is a way to do that.
Well, when we talk about it in manufacturing, we talk about draining the swamp. and if you drain it completely, you're going to crash your boat on the rocks. So what you do is you drain it a little bit, and then you see a couple of those rocks sticking up. Well, you knock those rocks down. Then you drain the swamp a little bit more. A couple more rocks will start to pop up. And it's just the Pareto principle, right? What's the biggest cause of headaches? Get that fixed. It might be the constraint, might be some, administrative thing. And then once you fix that, then you say, now I'm going to try and go faster. I'm going to try and remove inventory on the floor. Mm-hmm. Well, now that's going to expose more problems. Well, if you try and fix everything at once, you just failed. Yeah. So the trick is to prioritize what is it that I'm going to fix next.
Yeah, we've mentioned this guy before. I'll mention it again. Goldratt wrote a series of books on theory of constraint. But what was fun, in addition to a kind of a theoretical book, he also wrote a novel. The novels are a great read, and they get at this point Mark's making about, where's the rock, right? Where's the problem? And there's side stories about how, I spent all this money on this particular machine. I'm going to make sure this machine runs 100% of the time because it is, in fact, my biggest investment in the plant. That sounds logical, right? Except the part that it produces goes to an assembly process where the assembly process has a failure rate of 1 in 5. And so the product coming out the door is 80% of the efficiency of the machine that you spent all this money on. And so the novels go on to teach you about which one's the better measure, the measure out of the factory or the measure out of that machine. And so this gets to what you measure matters, right? Well, the same applies here is you really got to think about, number of change, an efficient change process. Is that your goal? Or is the goal no changes after release, right? And so there are these lessons learned that come from experience that you're like, well, how do I drain the swamp? You drain the swamp with lean techniques. There's 8 of them we talked about earlier today. The swamp draining starts to show you the rocks. Some rocks are transport issues. I'm moving stuff around I shouldn't move. Some of them are efficiency issues with a particular part of a line, right? Conveyance they talk about, is the conveyance efficient, right? The handoff between Mark and I, is it efficient? or am I only working 3 days a week and Mark's working the other 3 days? And so there's always a week lag. That would be a conveyance problem that should be fixed, right? So I think, theory of constraints, if you listeners, if you haven't taken the time to read the book, get the novel. It's entertaining. It's old now. It's probably 30 years old, but it really drives home this point. You're a plant manager. Where do you Where do you go to fix your plant? And then those ideas can be applied to engineering.
Okay. And just to Craig's point, he keeps saying goal. That's the name of the book, is The Goal.
Nice.
Oh, yeah. That's the novel. Thank you.
The novel is The Goal. Yes, absolutely. All right. So as we wrap this up, how do we engage engineering in these lean transformations? So, Craig, go ahead. We'll give Mark the last word today.
6 months in the plant. Go walk the floor. And it's got to be a really good plant. But I tell you what, it was eye-opening to me. And I think I'm a very successful engineer, but I learned a lot spending a bit of time on the floor, both a car floor and a parts floor, electronics floor, right? It's just once you do that and you get a little bit of training, then the next plant you walk in, within 10 minutes, you can start pointing out the constraints. It's just eye-opening what it is. And especially if you're in a mass production company or even a manufacturing company that only builds a few a year, walk the floor, look for the waste. It's very eye-opening.
Mark, your thoughts? How do we get engineering engaged in this?
Well, I think it needs to start from the top, and the battleground is middle management. And middle management is going to look at this like any other culture change 101, and they're going to say, yeah, I know they're saying that, but the first guy that tries it's going to get whacked. And so I think upper management needs to not only talk the talk, but walk the walk and start rewarding people for trying some of these techniques, even if they fail, because, if you don't know how it works, you're going to screw up a couple of times. And the first guy that screws up and gets whacked and fired, you'll never do lean. So it needs to be one of these things where you say, okay, I know there's a learning curve here, and I'm going to change my reward system to reward people that are trying to figure out what the metrics are and trying to find those first couple of rocks and do what they need to do. But at the end of the day, if top management spanks somebody for trying lean techniques and getting it wrong, you'll never do it.
Bravo, Mark. I couldn't agree more. And if you guys find yourselves in that position where they're talking the lean sermon, but they're refusing to acknowledge the process of learning about it, go work for somebody else. There are plenty out there that are doing just this, and they're pretty good at it. I'm a little negative about some of the startups because they don't think about any of this stuff. As we enter a recession, you might see some casualties along the way and on all these startups that got great funding, but they don't have a process. And my point in bringing this to your attention is the ones that have staying power are the ones that have recreated themselves. So, you want to be the long-lasting company that did have the courage to make these changes. Lean is a playbook to take advantage of. And I can't say it any stronger than that. And if you don't want a playbook to improve yourself, well, then fine. Then, make sure you know what you're going to do when you go out of business, because you probably will. Somebody's going to get you.
So, Mark, I promised you the last word, and Craig talked. So any last thoughts from you?
Well, I think it comes down to the fact that a lot of people, when they hear lean, they think skinny, malnourished or whatever. And that's not what it is. What it is no fat, pure muscle, robust, ready to take on the challenges, not wasting a single motion or movement, everything on point to deliver value to the customer. And somehow it's gotten, tainted as something hourly people do or whatever. And I think that has really hurt the engineering organizations and made them less able to deliver what they need to. And somehow, to get to the digital future, you're going to have to get beyond that and really eliminate not only the physical waste we got today, but you're going to have to avoid the digital wastes going forward.
So, Mark and Craig, thank you once again for being part of the digital battle. I know that the listeners of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, they like it when you guys debate all of these topics because it makes everyone think. So thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and listened to this show. Hey, to learn more about what you heard today, go to digitalenterprisesociety.org. We encourage you to leave comments in the show notes at digitalenterprisesociety.org or on your favorite podcast app about what it is that you love about this podcast. And then we want you to come back for the next discussion about organizational transformation through the use of digital tools and techniques. Join us here every week for more thoughts, ideas, and actionable information to help you navigate your career.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.